I thought I had seen everything in my 23 years as a commercial real estate agent, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered on that Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing my client database when I noticed something odd. Several of my long-term clients had gone radio silent over the past 2 weeks. These weren't just any clients. They were multi-million-dollar accounts I'd been nurturing for years. The first red flag came when I called Patricia Weber, CEO of Weber Industries. Her assistant's tone was strangely formal when she said, "Ms. Weber sends her best wishes for your retirement and hopes you get the help you need." I nearly dropped the phone. Retirement? Help? I hadn't mentioned either to anyone at work. This story will shock you, so make sure to like and subscribe for more. Drop a comment with your city name. My name is Margaret Hicks. I'm 61 years old, and I've built my career on trust and long-term relationships. What happened next would test everything I believed about workplace loyalty and professional ethics. I immediately called my husband Robert that morning, my hands still shaking from the conversation with Patricia's assistant. Robert and I have been married for 34 years, and he's always been my sounding board for work issues. He runs his own accounting firm from our home office, so he understands the business world's complexities. "Rob, something's very wrong," I said, pacing around our kitchen while he made his morning coffee. "3 of my biggest clients are acting like I'm already gone from the company. Patricia Weber's assistant mentioned retirement and getting help. I never said anything about retiring." Robert set down his mug and gave me that concerned look I know so well. "Margaret, slow down. What exactly did they say?" "That's just it. They're being vague but sympathetic, like they know something I don't." I pulled up my client list on my laptop. "I need to make more calls, but I have a terrible feeling about this." Robert walked over and placed his hands on my shoulders. "Before you spiral into worst-case scenarios, let's think logically. Who else at your office has access to your client information?" That's when it hit me. Brandon Kelly, my 34-year-old colleague, who joined our firm 8 months ago. Brandon had been unusually interested in my client relationships lately, asking detailed questions about contract renewals and upcoming negotiations. I'd been mentoring him, sharing my knowledge freely, because I believed in helping newer agents succeed. "Brandon," I whispered. "He's been asking a lot of questions about my accounts recently." Robert frowned. "The guy you've been training? Margaret, you've been nothing but generous with him. Why would he—" "I don't know, but I need to find out what's happening before I lose everything I've worked for." That afternoon, I decided to confide in Janet Morrison, my closest friend and colleague at the firm. Janet's been in commercial real estate for 15 years, and we've always had each other's backs. She has the office next to mine and notices everything that happens on our floor. "Janet, I need to ask you something confidential," I said, closing her office door behind me. "Have you heard any rumors about me retiring or having health problems?" Janet's expression immediately shifted from casual to concerned. "Margaret, I was wondering when you'd bring this up. I've heard whispers, but I didn't want to upset you if they were just office gossip." My heart sank. "What kind of whispers?" "Well, last week I overheard Brandon on a phone call with someone. He was saying something about how you were stepping back due to stress and mental health concerns. He mentioned that your clients would need new representation soon." Janet leaned forward in her chair. "I thought maybe you'd confided in him about something you weren't ready to share with the rest of us." "Janet, I never said any of that to Brandon or anyone else. I'm not retiring, and I'm certainly not having mental health issues that would affect my work." The anger was building in my chest. "He's been spreading lies about me." Janet's eyes widened. "Oh my God, Margaret, if he's telling your clients this information—" "He could be positioning himself to take over my accounts," I finished. "But how is he getting their contact information? That's supposed to be confidential. Have you checked your computer recently? Sometimes people can access shared files if the security settings aren't right. That evening, I sat at our dining room table with Robert, trying to piece together what Brandon might have done. Robert was reviewing some client contracts I'd brought home, looking for any patterns or clues. "Margaret, look at this," Robert said, pointing to one of the contracts. This renewal with Henderson Corp. Was supposed to be finalized last month. Did Brandon know about the timeline? Yes, I'd mentioned it during one of our mentoring sessions. I even showed him how I structure these types of renewals. I felt sick thinking about how I'd trusted him with sensitive information. "Rob, what if he's been systematically going through my client list and contacting them directly?" Robert reached across the table and took my hand. "We'll figure this out together. But you need concrete proof before you can confront him or go to management." "I know, but how do I get proof without looking like I'm paranoid or accusatory?" "That's where Janet comes in," Robert suggested. "She's already witnessed some of his behavior. Maybe she can help you document what's really happening." The next morning, I arrived at the office early and went straight to Janet's desk. She was already there, which wasn't unusual. We both liked the quiet morning hours before the chaos began. "Janet, I need your help with something delicate," I said, keeping my voice low. "I think Brandon is actively sabotaging my client relationships, but I need to prove it before I can do anything official." "What do you need me to do?" Janet asked without hesitation. "Because honestly, Margaret, I've been watching him more closely since our conversation yesterday, and his behavior is definitely suspicious." "What have you noticed?" "Yesterday afternoon, he made several phone calls and kept mentioning your name. I couldn't hear everything, but I distinctly heard him say Margaret's situation and transition period multiple times." Janet pulled out a small notebook. I started writing down times and what I could overhear. I felt a wave of gratitude for Janet's loyalty. "You've been documenting this?" "I figured if something was really wrong, you'd need details. Margaret, we've been friends for too long for me to stand by and watch someone destroy your reputation." That's when I realized the full scope of what Brandon was doing. He wasn't just stealing clients. He was systematically destroying my professional credibility by spreading false information about my mental state and career plans. The violation felt personal and devastating. And that's when the pattern snapped into place. That afternoon, Janet and I developed a plan. We decided she would position herself where she could better overhear Brandon's phone conversations, while I would start documenting any unusual client interactions or missed opportunities that seemed suspicious. "I'll keep that notebook handy," Janet said. "And Margaret, I think you should start saving any emails or messages that seem off, even the ones from clients that mention retirement or health issues." The idea of my clients thinking I was mentally unstable made my stomach churn, but Janet was right. I needed evidence. When I got home that evening, Robert was in his home office, but he came out as soon as he heard me come through the door. Over the past 15 years of marriage, he'd developed an uncanny ability to read my moods just from the sound of my footsteps. "Rough day?" he asked, wrapping me in a hug. Janet's been documenting Brandon's suspicious phone calls. "Robert, what if this goes deeper than I thought? What if he's not just telling clients I'm retiring, but actually convincing them that I'm having some kind of breakdown?" Robert pulled back to look at me seriously. "That would be character assassination, Margaret. That's not just stealing clients, that's destroying your professional reputation permanently." "I know. And the worst part is, some of these clients have worked with me for years. If they're starting to doubt my stability or competence..." I trailed off, feeling overwhelmed. Hey, Robert said gently. Your work speaks for itself. Your clients know who you are and what you're capable of. Don't let Brandon's schemes make you doubt yourself. That evening, as we sat together going through my recent client correspondence, Robert pointed out something I'd missed. Look at this email from Peterson Industries. They're asking about transition timeline and mentioning they want to make sure everything goes smoothly during this difficult time. Margaret, when did you ever discuss a transition with them? I didn't. That language has to be coming from Brandon. I felt a chill as I realized how calculated his approach had been. Robert, he's not just opportunistically stealing clients. He's been planning this. The next morning, Janet was waiting for me with more disturbing news. Margaret, I heard him on another call yesterday after you left. This time he was talking about helping clients through the transition and mentioned something about ensuring continuity of service during Margaret's leave. He's definitely positioning himself as their new point of contact. I felt betrayed on a level I hadn't expected. Brandon had been more than just a colleague I was mentoring. I'd trusted him with client strategies, shared my approaches to relationship building, even invited him to important meetings. Now he was using all of that inside knowledge against me. There's something else, Janet continued, lowering her voice. I think he's been going through your desk when you're not here. Yesterday, I saw him near your office during lunch, and when I asked what he needed, he seemed startled and made some excuse about looking for supplies. The violation of my personal workspace felt like the final straw. But as angry as I was, I knew I still needed more concrete evidence before I could take this to management. That afternoon, I decided to test my theory. I left a fake document on my desk about a fictional client meeting, then made sure to mention to Brandon that I had some important client calls to make from home the next morning. When I arrived at the office the next day, Janet met me with a knowing look. He took the bait, she whispered. About an hour after you left yesterday, I saw him in your office for several minutes, and this morning he made a phone call where he mentioned a client name that was only in that fake document you left. Finally, I had proof. But as I sat there holding Janet's notes, I realized that confronting Brandon was only part of the problem. I still had to figure out how to repair the damage he'd already done to my client relationships. That's when Brandon walked into the office, and I noticed something in his hand that made my blood run cold. It was a printout of our client database access log. My heart pounded as I realized what this meant. Brandon had been systematically documenting when I accessed client files, probably to time his own unauthorized access when I wasn't around. He walked past my office without making eye contact, but I caught sight of highlighted entries on the paper. My name, timestamps, client codes. He was tracking my every move. I immediately called my sister Sarah, needing someone outside this toxic situation to help me think clearly. Margaret, this is getting really serious, Sarah said when I explained what I'd just seen. He's not just stealing clients anymore. He's basically stalking your work patterns. Have you thought about what this could do to your reputation if he keeps spreading those lies about your mental health? That's exactly what's been keeping me up at night. What if future employers hear these rumors? What if clients actually believe I'm unstable? You need to protect yourself, but you also need to think about Mom. She's been so worried about you lately, and if this gets worse... Sarah was right. Our mother had been calling more frequently, sensing something was wrong, even though I'd tried to keep the details vague. The stress was affecting my entire family, not just my career. That evening, I made a difficult decision and drove to my mother's house. She deserved to know what was really happening, especially since my unusual behavior had been worrying her. I knew something was seriously wrong, Mom said after I explained the situation. You've been so tense lately, and when you canceled dinner last week without explanation, that wasn't like you at all. I didn't want to burden you with work problems. Margaret, I raised you to be stronger than this. Hiding from problems doesn't make them disappear, and it certainly doesn't protect the people who love you. We're family. We face these things together. Her words hit harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on handling everything myself that I'd forgotten how isolation was affecting my relationships with the people who mattered most. The next morning at work, Janet approached me with an expression that immediately put me on alert. "I think Brandon overheard me talking to you yesterday," she said quietly. "He's been watching me all morning, and he just asked me some pointed questions about what you and I discussed during our breaks." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you'd seemed stressed lately, if you'd mentioned feeling overwhelmed by your workload." "Margaret, I think he's trying to build a case that you really are having mental health issues, like he's trying to make his lies become reality." The manipulation was more sophisticated than I'd given him credit for. By spreading rumors about my mental state, then creating additional stress in my work environment, Brandon was essentially trying to manufacture the very problems he was already claiming existed. "Janet, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Do I seem different lately? Less capable? More scattered?" She considered this carefully before responding. "You seem like someone dealing with a betrayal by someone you trusted. That's not the same as being mentally unstable. You're handling this situation with more grace than most people would." Her reassurance helped, but I knew I couldn't let Brandon's psychological warfare continue. The fake database log he'd been carrying suggested he was planning something bigger than just stealing individual clients. That afternoon, I decided to take a calculated risk. Instead of continuing to gather evidence in secret, I walked directly to Brandon's desk. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice level but firm. For just a moment, I saw surprise flash across his face before he recovered his composure. "Sure, Margaret. What's on your mind?" "I know what you've been doing with my client contacts. I know about the calls you've been making, and I know about the database logs you've been keeping." The color drained from his face, but he maintained his innocent expression. "I'm not sure what you mean. I've just been trying to help with client relationships while you've been struggling lately." "There it is," I said. "Right there. I've never told you I was struggling with anything." "So where exactly did you get that information?" Brandon's eyes darted around the office, probably checking to see who might be listening. "Margaret, maybe we should discuss this privately. You seem a bit intense right now." Even faced with direct confrontation, he was still trying to make me seem unstable. But something had shifted in my perspective after talking with Sarah and my mother. Their support had reminded me of my own strength. "No, Brandon. I think this conversation is exactly as private as it needs to be." Janet, who had been pretending to work at her desk nearby, looked up with undisguised interest. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had allies instead of fighting this battle completely alone. But Brandon's next words revealed he had one more card to play that I hadn't anticipated. Brandon straightened in his chair, and I could see him shifting tactics in real time. His innocent expression hardened into something more calculated. "You know what, Margaret? I've been trying to protect you, but maybe it's time we were completely honest here." He glanced toward Janet, then back at me. "I've been documenting some concerning patterns in your work because I was worried about you, and about our clients." My stomach dropped. "Documenting what patterns?" "Memory lapses, missed deadlines, inconsistent client communications." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through it deliberately. "I have timestamps on everything." "The Henderson account where you forgot about the follow-up call." The Morrison project, where you submitted the wrong version of the proposal. Each example he mentioned was real. Minor mistakes I'd made over the past few months, the kind every person makes occasionally. But hearing them listed together like evidence in a court case made my chest tighten. Those were isolated incidents, I said, but I could hear the defensive edge creeping into my voice. Were they, though? Brandon's tone was almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. Margaret, I care about you as a colleague. That's why I started reaching out to some of your clients myself, to make sure they were getting consistent service while you work through whatever's going on. Janet stood up from her desk. That's a load of garbage, Brandon. He turned to her with raised eyebrows. Janet, I know you and Margaret are close, but close enough to know that she's never missed a deadline in the 3 years I've worked with her. Close enough to know that the Henderson follow-up was delayed because you told her the client had requested to push it back a week. Janet crossed her arms. I heard that conversation. I stared at Janet, pieces clicking into place. You told me Mr. Henderson wanted to reschedule? I was trying to help manage your workload, Brandon said smoothly. You seemed overwhelmed. No. The word came out stronger than I'd intended. No, you weren't helping. You were creating problems you could point to later. Brandon sighed heavily, the sound of someone dealing with an unreasonable person. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This paranoid thinking, these accusations. Margaret, when was the last time you took a real vacation? When did you last see a doctor for a checkup? The questions hit their mark because they highlighted real aspects of my life. I hadn't taken time off in over a year. I had been putting off my annual physical. But the way he weaponized these normal human behaviors made me feel exposed and vulnerable. I think, Janet said carefully, that Margaret's health is between her and her doctor, not between her and you. Of course, Brandon agreed quickly. I'm just concerned as a friend. Friends don't steal client contacts, I said. I haven't stolen anything. I've been building relationships to support our team's overall success. He looked genuinely hurt by the accusation. Margaret, I think you need to consider that your perspective on this situation might not be entirely objective right now. There it was again, the suggestion that my perception of reality couldn't be trusted. What made it so insidious was that he wasn't wrong about the small work mistakes. They had happened. But he was reframing them as symptoms of something larger, something that justified his interference. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. How did your conversation go with your friend? Feeling better about the situation? The message reminded me of her words about trusting my instincts. I looked up at Brandon, who was watching me with what appeared to be genuine concern etched on his face. You're very good at this, I said quietly. Good at what? Making me question myself, taking real things that happened and twisting them into something else. I felt steadier now, my voice finding its strength. But here's what I know for certain. I never told you I was having mental health issues. I never asked you to contact my clients, and I never gave you permission to document my work performance. Brandon's expression shifted slightly. Margaret, and another thing I know for certain, I continued. Is that Morrison project you mentioned? The wrong version of the proposal I supposedly submitted? He waited. I never worked on the Morrison project. That was your account from the beginning. Janet's eyes widened. Brandon's face went completely blank for a moment before he recovered. You're right, he said slowly. I misspoke. I meant the Martinelli project. But the damage was done. In trying to create a pattern of my mistakes, he'd included something that could never have been my error. The lie hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. I think, I said, we need to have a different kind of conversation. One that involves HR. Brandon's careful composure finally cracked. Margaret, that's not necessary. We can work this out between ourselves. But as I reached for my phone to call our human resources director, Brandon said something that made me freeze. Before you make that call, there's something else you should know about your client database access. I kept my finger poised over my phone, but Brandon's words had the intended effect. I hesitated. What about my client database access? I asked, hating myself for taking the bait, but needing to know. Brandon glanced at Janet, then back at me. Your login credentials were flagged in the system 3 weeks ago. I noticed unusual patterns in your access times and data downloads. What kind of unusual patterns? Late-night logins, weekend access when you weren't scheduled to work, large data exports. He paused, letting this sink in. The kind of activity that suggests someone might be preparing to leave the company and take client information with them. Janet leaned forward. Margaret, is that true? I felt the ground shifting beneath me again. I do work late sometimes, and I've exported client lists for legitimate reasons, preparing for meetings, organizing follow-ups. At 2 a.m? Brandon asked. On Sundays? My mind raced, trying to remember specific instances. There had been nights when I couldn't sleep and came in early, maybe around 5 or 6 a.m. And yes, I'd worked some weekends when deadlines were tight. But 2 a.m? Sunday exports? I don't remember accessing anything at 2 a.m, I said carefully. The logs don't lie, Brandon said. Janet, I showed you the printouts yesterday. You saw the timestamps. Janet nodded slowly. I did see them. That's actually part of why I wanted to have this conversation today. I stared at her. You've been discussing my computer usage behind my back? Margaret, we were worried, Janet said. When Brandon brought these concerns to me, along with the client complaints and the work quality issues, it painted a picture of someone who might be struggling more than they're willing to admit. What client complaints? The words came out sharper than I intended. Brandon pulled out his phone and scrolled through it. Mrs. Chen from Harmony Wellness called last Tuesday. She said you seemed confused during your presentation and forgot several key points you'd discussed in previous meetings. I remembered that meeting. I had been tired, and yes, I'd lost my train of thought once or twice. But confused? She seemed satisfied when I left. People are polite, Margaret. They don't always express concerns directly to the person involved. Brandon continued scrolling. And David Kim from Precision Manufacturing mentioned that you'd been calling him repeatedly about a contract that was already finalized. I called him twice for clarification on the renewal timeline. That's standard follow-up. 4 times in one day, according to his assistant. I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. Had it been 4 times? I remembered being frustrated about not getting a clear answer, and maybe I'd been more persistent than usual. Janet was watching me with a mixture of concern and something else I couldn't quite identify. Margaret, I need to ask you directly. Are you considering leaving the company? No, I said immediately. Why would you think that? The database activity suggests preparation for departure. The decline in work quality suggests disengagement. And now Brandon tells me you've been talking about mental health struggles. I never talked to Brandon about mental health struggles. Brandon sighed. Margaret, last week by the coffee machine, you specifically said you were having trouble sleeping and that stress was making it hard to think clearly. You mentioned considering taking some time off to deal with personal issues. The conversation came back to me in fragments. I had been tired after a difficult night with my mother, who'd been having one of her episodes. I might have mentioned stress. I might have said something about thinking more clearly. I was talking about my mother, I said. She's been having health issues, and it's been stressful helping her manage them. You see how these things can be misinterpreted? Brandon said gently. I heard someone I care about expressing distress, and I wanted to help. By calling my clients and telling them I was retiring? I never said you were retiring. I told them you were taking some time to focus on personal wellness and that I would be available to ensure continuity of service. The distinction was subtle, but important. I tried to remember exactly what my clients had said when they'd called me. Had they used the word retiring, or had I assumed that's what Brandon had told them? Mr. Peterson specifically said you told him I was retiring due to mental health issues? I said, clinging to the one concrete detail I was sure about. Brandon frowned. That's not what I said to Mr. Peterson. I told him you were taking some personal time and that he shouldn't worry about any interruption in service quality. Then why did he think I was retiring? I don't know, Margaret. Maybe he misunderstood. Maybe he drew his own conclusions. People do that sometimes when they're given incomplete information. Janet was taking notes now, which made my stomach clench. Margaret, I think we need to get to the bottom of this. These database access logs are a serious concern, regardless of the other issues. Can I see them? I asked. The logs? Brandon and Janet exchanged a look. I don't have them with me right now, Janet said. They're back in my office. Then let's go to your office. Another pause. Margaret, Janet said carefully, I think before we do that, we should discuss what happens next. If there are legitimate explanations for these access patterns, that's one thing. But if there's something else going on... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. My job was on the line. There's nothing else going on, I said. I haven't done anything wrong. Then you won't mind if we involve IT in reviewing your recent activity? Brandon asked. A full audit of your computer usage, email communications, file transfers? The way he phrased it made me hesitate again. A full audit sounded invasive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, some way, Brandon had positioned things so that any evidence would make me look guilty. Actually, I said, I think I would like to call HR first. But as I started to dial, Janet reached across and gently placed her hand over my phone. Margaret, before you make that call, I need you to know that Brandon has already filed a preliminary report with HR about his concerns. If we escalate this now, it becomes a formal investigation. My blood ran cold. What kind of preliminary report? Brandon leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since this whole conversation started, I saw something that looked almost like satisfaction cross his face. I documented my concerns about unusual database access patterns and some behavioral changes I've observed. Behavioral changes? The words came out sharper than I intended. You've seemed distracted lately, stressed. There have been a few times when you've seemed confused about client details during our team meetings. I stared at him. Those moments he was referring to, I remembered them differently. Times when I'd questioned information that didn't match my records. Times when I'd asked for clarification on client situations that seemed to have changed without my knowledge. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly. You accessed my client database, contacted my clients, and when I questioned it, you filed a report suggesting I'm having behavioral problems? That's not how it happened, Brandon said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Janet shifted uncomfortably. Look, Margaret, I think we're all getting a bit heated here. Why don't we table this for now and reconvene tomorrow morning? That'll give everyone time to cool down and think about next steps. No, I said firmly. I want to see those access logs right now. If Brandon is accusing me of something, I have a right to see the evidence. Margaret, I really think... Janet, either I see those logs now or I'm calling HR myself. Not tomorrow, not after Brandon has more time to prepare his story. Now. The silence stretched between us. I could feel my heart pounding, but I forced myself to maintain eye contact with Janet. Fine, she said finally. But I want both of you to understand that once we go down this path, there's no taking it back. If there's an innocent explanation, great. But if not... We walked to Janet's office in tense silence. Brandon followed behind us, and I could practically feel him thinking, calculating. When Janet pulled up the database logs on her computer screen, I positioned myself where I could see clearly. Here, she said, pointing to a series of entries. These are the unusual access patterns Brandon flagged. I scanned the screen, looking at the timestamps and user IDs. At first, everything looked normal. Routine client updates, scheduled report generations. Then I saw them. A series of late-night database queries under my user ID, accessing client contact information for accounts I hadn't worked on in months. I wasn't here at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday, I said immediately. I was home. Can you prove that? Brandon asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Could I prove where I was last Tuesday night? I lived alone. I might have been watching TV, reading, sleeping. No witnesses, no receipts, no digital trail. Look at the pattern, I said, studying the screen more carefully. These late-night accesses, they're all for clients that Brandon has been trying to poach for months. Janet frowned. What do you mean, poach? He's been positioning himself as a backup contact for several of my major accounts, always volunteering to help with their projects, suggesting he could take the lead on certain initiatives. That's called being a team player, Brandon said. Is it? I pointed to the screen. Because every single one of these suspicious accesses corresponds to a client you've expressed interest in managing. Janet was quiet for a long moment, studying the data. These passwords, she said finally. Margaret, have you shared your login credentials with anyone? Of course not. Have you written them down anywhere? Left them where someone could see them? I started to say no automatically, then stopped. My password. I had changed it recently after one of those company-wide security updates. The new one was harder to remember, so I'd written it down on a sticky note and... My stomach dropped. What is it? Janet asked, seeing my expression. I might have written my new password down, temporarily, just until I memorized it. Where? I closed my eyes, trying to remember. On my desk, under my keyboard. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Brandon, where anyone walking by could have seen it if they looked. Brandon's face had gone very still. Are you suggesting that I'm suggesting that someone with access to my workspace could have seen my password and used it to access the database under my credentials. That's a serious accusation, Janet said. So, is accusing me of stealing client information and having mental health problems. The three of us stood there in Janet's office, the computer screen still displaying the damning log entries. I could see Janet processing everything, weighing the possibilities. Brandon remained silent, but something in his posture had changed. There's one way to settle this, I said finally. The building security cameras. They'll show who was in the office during those late-night access times. Brandon spoke up quickly. The cameras in the main office area have been down for maintenance this week. I mentioned it in Monday's team meeting. Had he mentioned that? I tried to remember Monday's meeting, but the details were fuzzy. So much had happened since then. What about the parking garage cameras? I asked. Those would show whose cars were here late at night. Janet nodded slowly. That's actually a good point. I can request that footage. This is getting out of hand, Brandon said. We're talking about launching a full investigation based on speculation and paranoia. Whose paranoia? I asked. Mine for thinking someone stole my password, or yours for filing reports about my mental state? Stop. Janet held up both hands. Everyone stop. This conversation is over. I'm calling HR right now, and we're going to handle this through proper channels. Both of you go home. Don't access any company systems. Don't contact any clients. Don't discuss this with anyone else in the office. We'll sort this out tomorrow. As we left Janet's office, Brandon walked quickly toward the elevator. But just before the doors closed, he turned back and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Margaret, he said quietly. I really hope this doesn't get worse than it already is. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving me standing alone in the hallway, wondering if that had been a warning or a threat. The drive home felt surreal, like I was moving through thick fog. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as Brandon's parting words echoed in my mind. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban streets, but I barely noticed the familiar landmarks that usually marked my transition from work mode to home mode. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a full minute, staring at my house. The yellow paint looked tired in the fading light, and I noticed the flower boxes Emma had helped me plant last spring were looking scraggly. Normal observations that felt strange after the day I'd had. Inside, the house felt too quiet. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and immediately noticed the blinking light on my landline answering machine. 3 messages. My stomach clenched as I pressed play, half expecting to hear client voices asking about my supposed retirement. The first message was from my dentist's office confirming next week's cleaning. The second was a robocall about my car warranty. The third made me sink into a kitchen chair. Hi, Margaret. This is David Chen from Hartwell Industries. I got a call from someone at your office today saying you were retiring due to health issues. I'm confused because we just scheduled our quarterly review for next Friday. Could you call me back? I'd really like to hear from you directly. I stared at the machine as it reset itself. So it was true. Brandon hadn't just been planning to steal my contacts, he'd already started making calls. The violation felt personal in a way that surprised me with its intensity. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How did the meeting go? Call me when you can. Before I could respond, another text came through, this one from Tom. Heard there was drama at work today. You okay? I frowned at Tom's message. How could he have heard about it already? I was still staring at the phone when it rang, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. Margaret? It was Emma, her voice tight with concern. I've been worried since your text this morning. What happened with Janet? It's complicated. I found myself standing up and pacing to the living room window, looking out at the empty street. Brandon was in the meeting too. Wait, what? Why would he be there if you were reporting him? I explained the whole confrontation, from Janet's initial accusations to the computer logs to Brandon's final cryptic comment in the elevator. Emma listened without interrupting, which I appreciated more than she probably knew. So, they're treating you like the suspect, she said when I finished. It looks that way. Janet seemed to believe me by the end, but there's no proof, and now I'm suspended while they investigate. Suspended? Margaret, this is serious. You need to document everything. Document what? That my coworker might have looked over my shoulder and seen my password? That clients are getting calls about my mental health, but I can't prove who made them? Emma was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. You said David Chen called you directly. That's something. It means the clients don't necessarily believe whatever Brandon told them. She was right, but it didn't make me feel much better. Emma, what if this ruins everything? What if Janet decides it's easier to believe Brandon? He's been there longer. He's charming. And I'm the one who looks unstable right now. You're not unstable. You're dealing with someone who's actively working against you. There's a difference. Through the window, I watched a neighbor walking their dog. Such a normal evening activity that it felt like it belonged to a different world than the one I was currently inhabiting. Tom texted me, I said, remembering his message. He said he heard there was drama at work. How would he know that? Emma paused. I might have mentioned to him that you were having problems with a coworker. When he called earlier, he sounded worried about you. He called you? You've been stressed for weeks, Margaret. We're both concerned. The fact that my siblings were discussing my situation behind my back should have bothered me. But instead, I felt oddly comforted. At least someone was in my corner. The worst part, I said, settling into my armchair, is that I keep second-guessing myself. What if I did leave my password visible? What if I did seem unstable to the clients? Brandon made it sound like the mental health story was based on real observations. Stop. Emma's voice was firm. Don't let him get in your head. That's exactly what he wants. But what if... Margaret, listen to me. You've been doing this job successfully for 8 years. You've never had complaints about your client relationships. You don't suddenly become incompetent because some ambitious coworker decides he wants your accounts. I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. Emma was right, but the doubt felt like a physical weight in my chest. What do I do now? I asked. First, you call David Chen back tonight. If other clients got similar calls, they might reach out to you too. Get ahead of it. And then? Then we figure out how to prove Brandon did this. There was something in Emma's voice, a determined edge that made me sit up straighter. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, she said slowly, that people who are willing to steal client information and spread lies about their coworkers probably aren't careful about covering their tracks everywhere else. Before I could ask what she meant, my doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Tom standing on my porch, holding what looked like a bag of takeout. Emma, Tom's here. Good. Don't try to handle this alone, okay? Call David Chen, eat something, and we'll talk more tomorrow. After hanging up, I opened the door to find Tom looking unusually serious. Chinese food, he announced, holding up the bag. And before you say you're not hungry, you're eating anyway. Emma's orders. Despite everything, I smiled. She called you. She's worried. I'm worried. You look like you haven't slept in days. He stepped inside and headed straight for the kitchen. So, we're going to eat, and you're going to tell me everything that happened today. As Tom unpacked containers of food, filling my quiet house with the sounds of normal life, I realized how isolated I'd felt since walking out of Janet's office. Having him here made the day's events feel less surreal, more manageable. Tom, I said as we sat down at the kitchen table. What if I can't prove any of this? He looked up from his lo mein, his expression thoughtful. Then we find another way. What do you mean? Tom was quiet for a moment, twirling noodles around his fork. When he looked at me again, there was something calculating in his eyes that reminded me of when we were kids, and he was plotting revenge against neighborhood bullies. I mean, he said carefully, that Brandon isn't the only one who can make phone calls. The way Tom said it made something cold settle in my stomach. I set down my chopsticks and studied his face across the kitchen table. What exactly are you suggesting? Tom took another bite of lo mein, chewing thoughtfully before answering. I'm suggesting that if Brandon can call your clients and spread lies, maybe it's time your clients heard the truth from someone else. Tom, I can't have you calling my clients. That would look completely unprofessional, and honestly, it might make things worse. Not your clients, he said, leaning back in his chair. His clients. I stared at him. What? Think about it, Margaret. Brandon's ambitious, right? Willing to steal and lie to get ahead. People like that don't usually limit their bad behavior to one situation. If he's screwing you over, chances are he's done something similar before, or he's cutting corners somewhere else. The idea made me uncomfortable, even as part of me was intrigued. You want me to go digging for dirt on Brandon? I want you to protect yourself. There's a difference. Tom reached across the table and touched my hand. Look, I've seen what happens when good people try to take the high road against people who have no problem playing dirty. Sometimes you end up roadkill. I pulled my hand back, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. This is getting so complicated. A week ago, my biggest worry was whether I'd hit my quarterly targets. Now I'm sitting here talking about investigating a coworker like we're planning some kind of corporate espionage. You're talking about protecting 8 years of work and your professional reputation, Tom corrected. Brandon made it complicated when he decided to steal from you. My phone buzzed on the table between us. David Chen's name appeared on the screen, and my heart rate immediately spiked. It's David, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Answer it, Tom said firmly. Remember what Emma said. Get ahead of this. I swiped to accept the call, putting it on speaker so Tom could hear. Hi, David. Thank you for calling me back. Margaret, I have to ask you something directly, and I hope you'll be honest with me. David's voice was serious, businesslike. Are you planning to leave the firm? Absolutely not, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. David, I don't know what you were told or by whom, but I have no intention of retiring or leaving. I'm committed to continuing our partnership for as long as you'll have me. There was a pause. The young man who called said you were dealing with some serious health issues and that the firm was transitioning your accounts to ensure continuity of service. Tom's jaw tightened, and I felt a fresh wave of anger. David, I want you to know that no one from our firm is authorized to discuss my personal health information with clients, even if there were issues to discuss, which there aren't. What this person told you was completely false. So, you're not retiring? I'm not retiring. I'm not dealing with health issues that would affect my work, and I certainly didn't authorize anyone to contact my clients about transitioning accounts. Another pause, longer this time. Margaret, I've worked with you for 6 years. If someone's trying to push you out or steal your clients, that's something I should know about. Tom nodded encouragingly at me. David, I appreciate your loyalty more than you know. Can I ask you exactly what this person said and how they identified themselves? He said his name was Brandon something or other, claimed he was from your firm's client transition team, said you were stepping back for health reasons and that he'd be taking over the account to ensure seamless service. Honestly, it seemed odd to me. You've never mentioned health problems, and if you were planning to retire, I would have expected to hear it from you first. You absolutely should have heard it from me first, because it would never happen without extensive discussion with you. I looked at Tom, who was making encouraging gestures. David, I need to ask a favor. If anyone else contacts you claiming to represent me or the firm regarding changes to our arrangement, would you please contact me directly before making any decisions? Of course. Margaret, is everything all right? This sounds like more than just a miscommunication. Tom leaned forward and mouthed, "Tell him at me." I hesitated, then decided on a middle ground. I'm dealing with some internal issues at the firm, but nothing that affects my ability to serve you or my commitment to our relationship. I just need to make sure all communication goes through proper channels. I understand. And Margaret, for what it's worth, I told this Brandon person that I'd need to speak with you directly before making any changes to our account structure. I've been happy with your service, and I'm not interested in working with someone else unless you personally recommend them. After I ended the call, Tom was grinning. See, your clients trust you. Brandon's plan isn't working the way he hoped. One client? I corrected, though I felt a small surge of relief. And David's always been particularly loyal. Other clients might not be so skeptical. Then we make sure you get to them before Brandon does. Tom started clearing the takeout containers. Do you have a complete list of your client contacts? Yes, but Tom, I can't just call all my clients out of the blue and say, hey, just so you know, ignore any calls from people claiming I'm mentally ill and retiring? That would be insane. No, but you can reach out to your most important clients with some kind of legitimate business reason. Schedule check-in calls, send updates on their accounts. Whatever you normally do. Just do it faster and more frequently than usual. I had to admit it wasn't a terrible idea. That might work for some of them. And for the Brandon problem? Tom sat back down across from me, his expression serious again. I still think you need to find out what else he's been up to. People like him don't just wake up one day and decide to steal client lists. This kind of behavior usually escalates over time. How would I even do that? I can't exactly interrogate our co-workers about Brandon's past misdeeds. Tom smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Leave that to me. What do you mean, leave that to you? I mean, Tom said, standing up and heading for the kitchen sink, that you're not the only one who can make strategic phone calls. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with Tom's leftover Chinese food. The conversation with David had given me a small boost of confidence, but in the harsh light of day, the reality of what Brandon was doing felt overwhelming. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone and my laptop, trying to work up the courage to start making those strategic client calls Tom had suggested. Tom had texted me early, saying he was doing some reconnaissance, but wouldn't elaborate. I wasn't sure if I should be grateful or terrified about whatever he had planned. My phone buzzed with a call from Sarah, and I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I hadn't talked to her since our dinner conversation, and I wondered if she was calling to check on me, or if something else had happened. Hey, how are you holding up? Sarah's voice was warm, but concerned. I'm okay. Well, not okay, but managing. Tom helped me call one of my clients yesterday, and it turns out Brandon had already contacted him with his little story about my mental health. Oh no, what did the client say? Actually, he didn't believe it. He wanted to talk to me directly before making any changes. But Sarah, if Brandon's already started making calls? I trailed off, feeling that familiar surge of panic. Okay, breathe. One client who didn't believe him is actually really good news. It means his approach isn't foolproof. Sarah paused, and I could hear her moving around, probably getting ready for work. Have you talked to Linda yet? No, and I'm dreading it. I know I need to tell her what's happening, but I have no idea how she's going to react. She might think I'm being paranoid or dramatic. Or she might think Brandon's behavior is completely unacceptable and do something about it. I rubbed my forehead, feeling a headache building. That's what I'm afraid of, too. If this turns into some kind of formal investigation or HR nightmare, it could end up being worse for me than for him. He's already planted the seed that I'm having mental health issues. If I'm the one who brings forward accusations, it looks like you're unstable and vindictive, Sarah finished. I see the problem. Exactly. I feel like I'm trapped in this impossible situation where any move I make could backfire. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her thinking. What did Tom mean yesterday when he said he was going to make some strategic phone calls? That sounded ominous. I have no idea, and that's what worries me. Tom has good intentions, but his idea of helping sometimes involves creative solutions that don't always consider all the consequences. Maybe you should check in with him before he does something that makes your situation worse. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone beeped with another call. Tom's name appeared on the screen. Speak of the devil! Sarah, Tom's calling me. Can I call you back? Of course. And Margaret, remember that you haven't done anything wrong here. You're protecting yourself and your clients. That's not paranoid or dramatic. It's professional. I switched over to Tom's call, bracing myself for whatever he was about to tell me. Good morning, sister dear. I hope you're sitting down, because I have some very interesting information about your friend Brandon. Tom, please tell me you didn't do anything crazy. Define crazy. I could hear the grin in his voice, which was not reassuring. I made a few casual phone calls to some mutual acquaintances in your industry. People talk, Margaret, especially when you ask the right questions in the right way. My stomach dropped. What kind of questions? And what mutual acquaintances? Tom, if word gets back to Brandon that I'm investigating him... Relax. I was very subtle. I just mentioned that I was thinking about changing financial advisors and asked if anyone knew anything about the team at your firm. General reputation stuff. And it turns out our boy Brandon has quite a history. This isn't his first rodeo when it comes to questionable client acquisition tactics. I felt my pulse quicken. What do you mean? I talked to Jake Morrison. You remember him from college? He works at Patterson and Associates now. Apparently, Brandon worked there for about 18 months before joining your firm, and his departure was, let's call it, abrupt. Tom, you can't just call people I went to college with and pump them for information about my coworkers. This is exactly the kind of thing I was worried about. Would you rather I hadn't called? Because what Jake told me is pretty significant. Despite my frustration with Tom's methods, I found myself leaning forward. What did he say? Brandon left Patterson under a cloud. There were questions about client information being shared inappropriately, and at least one instance where a client complained that Brandon had misrepresented another advisor's situation to try to get them to switch. The information hit me like a cold wave. Are you serious? Dead serious. Jake said it never became a formal disciplinary issue because Brandon resigned before they could complete their investigation. But everyone in the office knew what had happened. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this. So he's done this before. It sounds like it's his standard operating procedure. Jake also mentioned that Brandon had been pretty aggressive about trying to access client files that weren't assigned to him. Sound familiar? It sounded very familiar, and suddenly some of Brandon's behavior over the past few months made more sense. The way he always seemed to know details about clients he wasn't working with. His questions about my client relationships, even the way he'd positioned himself near Linda's office during our team meetings. Tom, this is huge. If Linda knew about his history? The question is, how do you tell her without it looking like you're just trying to smear Brandon because you're upset about the current situation? That was exactly the question, and I still didn't have a good answer. But knowing that Brandon had a pattern of this behavior changed everything. It meant I wasn't being paranoid or oversensitive. It meant this was serious enough that another firm had been willing to let him go, rather than risk keeping him on. I need to figure out how to handle this, I said, more to myself than to Tom. Well, you'd better figure it out fast, Tom replied, his tone suddenly more serious. because Jake also mentioned that Brandon had been asking questions about opportunities at other firms in the area. If he's planning to jump ship again, he might be accelerating his timeline for stealing your clients. The urgency in Tom's voice made my stomach drop. What do you mean, accelerating his timeline? Think about it, Tom said, leaning forward across the kitchen table. If he's already reaching out to other firms, he's not planning to stick around much longer. And if he's going to steal your clients, he needs to do it before he leaves, while he still has access to everything. I felt a chill run down my spine. The Peterson account review is next week, and I have that big presentation for the Hendersons on Thursday. Exactly. He knows your schedule, he knows when your biggest clients are making decisions, and he knows you've been distracted by this whole situation. It's the perfect time for him to make his move. I stood up and started pacing around the kitchen, my mind racing through all the possibilities. I have to tell Linda. I can't wait anymore. How are you going to explain knowing about his history at Patterson Associates? That stopped me in my tracks. Tom was right. I couldn't exactly walk into Linda's office and casually mention that my brother had been conducting his own private investigation into Brandon's employment history. Maybe I don't have to explain how I know, I said slowly. Maybe I just need to give Linda enough information that she'll look into it herself. Tom raised an eyebrow. That's pretty risky. If you're wrong about any of this. But what if I'm right and I don't do anything? What if Brandon walks out next week with half my client list and I just let it happen because I was too afraid to speak up? The front door opened and I heard Mom calling out. I'm home. Where is everyone? Kitchen, I called back, grateful for the distraction. Mom appeared in the doorway carrying grocery bags, and both Tom and I jumped up to help her. You two look serious, she observed, setting her purse on the counter. Still talking about your work situation? Tom found out some information about Brandon, I said, then quickly filled her in on what we'd learned about his previous job. Mom listened quietly, putting groceries away as I talked. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You know, she finally said, this reminds me of something that happened when your father was still working. There was a colleague of his who seemed friendly enough, but something always felt off about him. Your dad kept making excuses for little things. Missing files, conversations that didn't quite add up, clients who seemed confused about information they claimed to have received. What happened? Tom asked. Your father finally talked to his supervisor about his concerns. Turned out this colleague had been skimming information and passing it along to competitors for months. The supervisor had been getting similar reports from other people, but hadn't put the pieces together until your dad came forward. So, Dad's supervisor was glad he spoke up? I asked. Very glad. She said she wished someone had come to her sooner, because by the time they caught on to what was happening, the damage was pretty significant. Mom closed the refrigerator and turned to face us. The point is, your dad's instincts were right, but he almost waited too long to act on them. The parallel was impossible to ignore. I'd been having the same nagging feeling about Brandon for weeks, making excuses for his behavior and telling myself I was being paranoid. I think I need to talk to Linda first thing Monday morning, I said. What are you going to say? Tom asked. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. I'm going to tell her about the clients who contacted me, about Brandon's questions regarding my accounts, and about the access logs showing him in files he shouldn't have been in. I'll suggest that she might want to look into his previous employment history. That's a good approach, Mom said. You're presenting facts and letting her draw her own conclusions. But what if she doesn't believe me? What if she thinks I'm just being competitive or paranoid? Mom walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. Honey, you've been with this company for 5 years. You have a solid reputation and good relationships with your clients and colleagues. Linda knows who you are. If you present your concerns professionally and factually, she'll take you seriously. Tom nodded in agreement. And if Brandon really is planning to leave soon, Linda needs to know about it regardless of everything else. It affects staffing and client coverage. They were both right, but I still felt nervous about the conversation ahead. What if Brandon finds out I talked to Linda? What if he tries to retaliate somehow? What kind of retaliation are you worried about? Mom asked. I don't know. He could try to undermine me with other colleagues, or spread rumors, or... I trailed off, realizing how paranoid I sounded. Or he could do exactly what he's already doing, Tom pointed out. He's already undermining you with clients and colleagues. At least this way, Linda will know what's happening and can keep an eye on the situation. That was a good point. Things couldn't get much worse than they already were, and at least by speaking up, I'd be taking some control over the situation instead of just reacting to Brandon's moves. Okay, I said, feeling more resolved. Monday morning, I'm going to talk to Linda. I'll present the facts and let her decide how to handle it. Good, Mom said. And remember, you're not asking her to fire Brandon or take any specific action against him. You're just making sure she has all the information she needs to make informed decisions about client assignments and office security. Exactly, Tom agreed. You're being professional and responsible by bringing this to her attention. I felt better having a concrete plan, even though the thought of actually having that conversation with Linda still made me nervous. But Mom was right. I had a good track record at the firm, and Linda had always been fair and professional in her dealings with everyone. There's one more thing, I said. After I talk to Linda, I should probably reach out directly to my key clients. Not to badmouth Brandon or create drama, but just to reinforce our working relationship and make sure they know I'm not going anywhere. That's smart, Mom said. Proactive communication is always better than damage control after the fact. The three of us spent the rest of the evening talking through different scenarios and how I might handle them. By the time Tom left and I was getting ready for bed, I felt more prepared and confident about confronting the situation head-on. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about what Mom had said about Dad's experience. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the scary thing to do. But waiting and hoping the problem would resolve itself clearly wasn't working. It was time to take action and trust that the truth would speak for itself. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough.